Hello and welcome to Them's Writing Words, a podcast discussing selected fanfictions from the world of pastel horse literature. My name is Scribbler, and I will be your moderator today. Joining me for this discussion, we have ShadowofCygnus.
Hello.
MamiDulugo.
Hello, everybody.
Midori.
Greetings and bienvenue.
Neighrator Pony.
Hello, everyone.
And Thornquill.
Hello, everyone.
Today we are looking at the fanfic The Moondela Effect by Fourths, as chosen by MamiDulugo. The synopsis reads... Mami, take it away.
Lyra is pretty darn sure that she remembers Princess Luna dying in exile on the moon. Bonbon is pretty darn sure that her mare friend's an idiot.
This story was published on 4th of April 2018, making it the newest story we've ever looked at on this podcast, because we are approximately 3 to 4 years out of date every time. And it clocks in at 5,247 words. So, we're going to start off with our usual thing of tags, summary of the story without spoilers, then going into spoilerific territory. So, we will let you know when we go into spoilers. To be honest, it's kind of hard not to spoil it just from that description and the title, but we'll see how we go. Then again, people might not know what the Mandela Effect is, because I didn't till I read this, so we'll see. First of all, tags. Do we believe they're accurate? It is a strange combination of comedy and tragedy. And I'll kick off with Cygnus. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, when I went into this and reading the tags for what they were, I was kind of expecting, more of a two-person thing, kind of a Waiting for Godot or something like that, where they just go back and forth on the issue rather than spiral into what eventually happens, he said, without wishing to spoil. I think comedy probably hits more at this than tragedy, but I do see where the oblique tragedy angle the author was going for comes into it. We'll get into that bit later, but I'm not entirely sure that that's perhaps the most apt description.
Mami?
Yeah, I think the tags are pretty accurate. I can see how people would want to contest the tragedy tag, but I think part of that comes from the common association that, tragedy and dark go together. So when I see tragedy, I'm expecting, okay, someone's going to die. But there are moments in this fic where you can just miss them if you're not reading into it. But there are little bits that would suggest that it's more like what's that term? Fridge horror, almost? But,
Yep.
Fridge tragedy? Where,
do you want to explain what fridge horror is, just for listeners, first of all?
Right. So fridge horror is where it's not heavily established what has gone wrong, but the more you think about it, the worse it gets. Isn't that what it is?
Absolutely. It is like when you realize that at the end of, for goodness sake, what's it called? At the end of Disney movies, half of the villains have died in horrifically bad ways. Like at the end of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in the 1930s. It's heavily implied that the Wicked Queen has been killed, but it's never fully confirmed, and it's only when you think afterwards, shit, she probably wasn't dead at the bottom of that cliff and the vultures are going to eat her alive. That's fridge horror. Yeah, that's fridge horror. When you only occurs to you afterwards how horrific what you just seen was.
Yeah, so it's a bit like that. I mean, there's this moment around the middle of the fic where there are implications given without getting into spoilers for it. That eventually someone in the fic will die. And there are there's a degradation of their mind going on, but we don't really get into it. But the more you think about that, the more you think about what happens after this fic and how that could make the tragedy tag suited a little better. So it's very much something you have to think about, and the author has stated that is intentional.
Midori?
I feel like the tags are appropriate. The comedy tag it's very clear that this is supposed to be a comedy. It's very clear that a lot of this is for humor. Tragedy, I feel like there is a double entendre of the tragedy tag in this case, in that it is played up as a comedic tragedy. It's played up as oh, this is such a tragic thing that happened, or even the implications that Mami just mentioned. But the real tragedy for me is just how this story plays out and how it ends. Just the sheer stupidity of everyone is what is the real tragedy for me here. And that's why I feel like the tragedy tag is appropriate in this case.
Neighrator?
think it's probably not a tragedy in the conventional sense that we're used to using the word or the tag. I confess I did not read this fic until a few hours ago when I rolled over and woke up and started reading on my phone while I was still in bed, so I may not have been the most alert that I could have been, so I can't wait to get into the spoilerific discussion.
Funnily enough, that's exactly how I read it. It's literally, I rolled over in bed this morning and went, oh, fuck, I've got to read that story.
I know you fuckers.
Yeah.
I knew that's what it was going to be like. That's why I picked a short one.
Yeah, but
you...
every other time I've spent days preparing. Because it was short, I thought, I'll leave it to the day.
I will have you know that I read this last night.
I meant to, and then I fell asleep.
Look at Midori the SWAT. Midori the Kino doing her homework before it was the day it was due in.
You're one to talk.
Yeah, I know, I'm crap. I'm not holding anybody up to my standard.
Okay, anyway, tags.
Tags, Neighrator.
Comedy, yes. Tragedy, we'll see.
Thornquill.
Well, I definitely feel that comedy applies. I will contest tragedy on this one, both on its common definition and its more literary definition. I don't get how this is a tragedy, and I'm interested to hear more about how what Mami was talking about how there are elements that we're supposed to think a lot more. I find that interesting that would be something more in-depth like that would be in a comedy. So I really do find this juxtaposition a very odd choice. And honestly, yeah, the fic itself just feels a little bit confused about its genre too. So I don't know. I contest tragedy. It definitely tries to go more for comedy. We'll get more into it.
Thank you.
I think it tried for comedy. I legitimately couldn't see any tragedy anywhere. I saw a whole bunch of stupidity and a few jabs at real life that made me deeply uncomfortable, but that was about it. We'll get into that when we get into spoilers. And to be honest, it was merely just discomfort because shit, we're going to have to talk about that and I'm going to get inundated with hate mail.
Keep it light.
Oh, yeah. It's like, I don't mind talking about death and dragons and infanticides and all the rest of it, but you're bringing up fucking politics, yay!
Oh, yeah, fuck.
I'm gonna get fucking crucified. It's my DMs.
I know either one of us just has to say one word, just one word, and we'll never be able to do this podcast again.
No.
I'm not going to, but you know which one it is.
I do, don't. Okay, so moving on from the tags. Summary of the story. So, Mami, since this is your story, you get to give us the non-spoilery version of this. What actually is this story about?
That's such a challenge. Like, the synopsis already did such a good job of it, and it's really hard.
This is the same problem that Cygnus faced in Dance.
It's so hard to talk about this.
And the spoiler-free description and the spoilerific description, and the fic itself, all the same thing.
They really are. Okay, fuck it. This is spoiler territory because literally...
Please don't make me work.
The title is the spoiler.
The title
is the whole concept.
Exactly.
The title is the thing.
Well, exactly. You can't really spoil something that gives itself away in the...
All right, I mean, here's the spoiler-free summary. The Mandela Effect. There you go. Done.
For those in the audience who do not know what the Mandela Effect is, because admittedly, apparently I lived through this, but I had no knowledge of it. What is it, Mami?
The Mandela Effect is like that. I think the one most people will know is the Berenstain and Bernstein Bears controversy, where people keep remembering like the title is spelled with an E in one way and like an A in the other or something. You know, where you're so convinced that something from your childhood or the past was done a certain way, but you find out eventually that no, it wasn't. And there's like this mass hysteria where a ton of people believe that this thing happened this way, but it didn't.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll just throw in that the only one that I know of is the Berenstain spelling controversy. And the reason is that I actually do remember all of those books being spelled with an E, whereas nowadays it's spelled with an A. And my parents remember it being spelled with an E, and my grandparents remember it being spelled with an E. I chalk it up to the typography on the titles. It's in cursive and you can't tell what it is. But so yeah, my entire family, you know, has the Mandela Effect where we remember book titles being spelled one way and they're actually spelled another. And like, I don't know if you were going to go into this, but like there's this element of the Mandela Effect where it's taken to be evidence of alternate universes, where the reason we remember these things one way is because they actually happened that way, and then the entire population of Earth did a phase shift into an alternate reality where just that one tiny little thing is different, which I think is a fun concept. But yeah, you have to know all of that in order to understand the story.
I would argue that point. I mean, I think it's a well enough story on its own, but there is something to be gained from understanding its roots and where its message came from.
Can I point something out? The origin of the name, the Mandela Effect. Because I love the fact that the first thing that popped into people's heads was a children's book when it's literally about a world leader and his name is the thing.
You can go ahead and give that example, the Mandela Effect's namesake.
The Mandela Effect comes from the fact that in the late 80s, a lot of people were convinced that Nelson Mandela had in fact died in prison. So when he was released, a lot of people didn't believe he really was Nelson Mandela and campaigned against him.
Yeah, and I mean, the stories are pretty much like a one-to-one to that scenario. But it's also not, like there is more added to it. But I did think it was pretty funny. Like, to get the joke, you do kind of have to look up the effect. But I don't mind a little light reading to understand the fic that I'm getting into.
Well, we did previously have to do homework about, the Rwandan genocide to enjoy a pony fic, so we're really picking them. We are so picking them.
Sodding hell, what did I miss?
This is an educational podcast.
Man.
That
was
the one I picked, and in that one, it actually didn't matter to the fic. It was just a bit of green text they lifted to have in the story to fill in some space. This one, you do need an understanding of what the Mandela Effect and kind of its cultural background and its meme status, basically. And I will actually push back on that. I think that is a problem, because if you go into this fic not knowing that, it does absolutely nothing to introduce you to the concept or to kind of explain it. And I think that's to the story's detriment, because it's assuming too much knowledge on the part of its reader base, from my perspective. And I knew what the Mandela Effect was going into this.
I didn't, and I got nothing out of this because of it. I had to go off and look it up afterwards when someone in chat mentioned it. I thought it was something to do with the Manchurian thing. It was like, nope, this is a completely different thing.
That would certainly lend itself to a different reading.
Just slightly, yes. But it meant that I went into this with pure ignorance. Unless you have that background reading, this is a shitty story. I'm sorry, but it is.
No.
I think that once you understand what the Mandela Effect itself is, it adds a level of nuance to the story that just isn't there if you don't have it.
Unfortunately for me, that's not the case. I mean, yes, I went into this not knowing what the Mandela Effect was, and I actually learned what the Mandela Effect was thanks to this, and I learned about the Mandela incident, etc., etc. But even with that knowledge, looking back in hindsight, I still just feel the same that I felt going through the fiction, and that was a roller coaster to, a roller coaster stupidity that had no real punchline, and that's how it felt to me.
Depends on your reading.
Go on, Mami. I know you want to respond to this.
This whole podcast is just going to be me squaring up against everybody. I didn't expect people to hate it.
Puff out your chest, girl.
Is this how Thorny always feels?
Okay, I can't speak for everybody else. I don't
really
hate this story. I just didn't get anything out of it, and I felt kind of resentful at the end that I didn't get anything out of it. It was like, oh, okay, I get the feeling that this was more intelligent than I was getting, and then when I got the meaning of Mandela Effect, it was like, oh, that doesn't make me feel any better.
I don't disagree with that. I find myself in the same boat. Don't hate it, but I really do think that it thinks that it's cleverer than it is.
I don't hate the story, and my thing isn't that I don't feel like it was trying to be clever. I feel like it was a big joke on purpose. It was like somebody's friend named Badgie, who was in the story, by the way. Badgie was just like, oh, hey, here's a pun. It's like, oh my god, I'm going to make an entire story based off of that, and it's going to be funny. And I look at...
Badgie, hang on, that father character is a real person.
Yes, this story exists because of Badgie, who is a nut. It's in the description, and
boy.
Badgie is that father figure in the story.
I didn't get that. Oh.
Which-
I missed that too.
I didn't read that.
I'll grant the story this. I don't know that it was trying to be anything other than just like, oh, hey, let's make fun of this pun a little bit. I don't know how serious it was trying to be. The tragedy tag definitely doesn't help that, but I don't feel like I can knock it on that front.
Yeah, and I'm not knocking it on that front, but that's what I'm saying. Like, everybody's here saying that there was some sort of deeper meaning behind this, and that it was trying to be a lot smarter than it was. But I feel like that this entire thing was just a rehash of the Mandela incident for shits and giggles with Luna. I don't feel like it had any deeper meaning, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's still funny for whoever finds this kind of thing funny. I just didn't personally.
I would argue it's a combination of the two. I mean, you can write a fic in partial seriousness while still having a root in the fact that it's a joke. So I think like the overall joke is that, Moondela, Mandela Effect. I mean, it's one for one. And that takes from canon. Like, the canon is that Luna was imprisoned on the moon and then she was released. But then in the fiction, it takes it a step further in making the connection to, okay, well, people thought she was dead. And I guess you could argue in canon they kind of did too, because they forgot about her. But
that's fair. And don't forget the other pun in the title, to Berenstain her good name.
Yeah.
That's the name of the chapter, yeah. So
This is a treat for people who love puns.
Was that on the Berenstain Bears?
Yes.
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 That, because I always get a little bit confused at how attached Americans mainly are to those books, because I don't know if they were a big thing over here. I don't know, that completely bypassed me as a child. And I'm a right age group.
They were a prominent feature in schoolrooms or across the U.S., I think. So yeah, I think everyone has read at least one of these books.
Yeah,
Cygnus, help me out. Did you come across these a lot as a child?
Sorry, was that directed at me?
Yeah, Cygnus, because I didn't see them at all as children. I was multiple children. I've grown into one person.
Hello, children.
Yes, no, I can safely say I've never run across any of these. I think we have a couple of them in the library, but other than that, no.
Okay, so it wasn't just me.
Apparently, yeah, they didn't make it over the ocean. But yeah, they're very simple little kids picture storybooks. They're on the same level as like the Clifford or the Curious George books.
See, now whenever I hear Curious George, all I think of is the Friends joke of Marcel the monkey humping him and suddenly he wasn't so curious.
Fucking hell.
I bring up all the best jokes, all the classiest. Y'all are talking about wonderful childhood memories and I bring up a fucking monkey.
A monkey fucking a monkey.
This is just like an 80s kid stand-up comedy at this point.
So I think the Mandela Effect in relation to the Berenstain Bears, it just has so much to do with the fact that the author obviously missed an opportunity for a pun there to spell it like B-E-A-R, bear and Berenstain Bears, obviously, and so everyone just kind of assumes that the author would have gone that route, and so hence a lot of confusion about the spelling.
Whereas in this case, Lyra sets up a conspiracy theory.
Does she set it up or does she genuinely believe it?
Well, much of a much in this. She's definitely the instigator for everybody else bringing it out into the open.
I would say it's her dad.
Then again, she's the one who goes to the park. He's definitely instigator of her believing it. She's the instigator of the mass riot.
She instigates it, but it just kind of happens too. Like, I don't think she expected it to spiral that far out of control.
I agree with you on that, because her reaction was, oh shit, everyone watching posters!
We're getting into spoiler territory. We've been in there for a long time
I think we've given up on that.
Yeah, I did say fuck it, we're in spoiler territory earlier.
I missed that part. If we're in spoiler territory, then fair enough. Don't forget that Lyra is the one on stage with a megaphone.
Yeah, exactly. Can I ask something, just since he's come up, about her dad? Was there a really funny joke, clever witticism I missed completely about his reaction to her saying, oh, Bonbon's my mare friend? I didn't get that, but I got the feeling that it was me, not the story.
Yeah, others can weigh in as well. But I think what was happening there is that, she called her dad for confirmation. Oh, yeah, I totally remember that. Yeah, you and me, we listened to that radio broadcast together where they said that the mayor in the moon was dead. He's like, oh, thanks, Dad. This feels so good to be validated. I'll be sure to tell Bonbon. And he says, who? as a bonbon, my girlfriend's like, right. I think the point of that whole interaction was that her dad's memory is just not that great anyway, and was never really that reliable to begin with, and maybe should not have. She shouldn't be relying on that as validation of the Moondela Effect.
Either
Right.
that, or it was meant as evidence of the dimensional shift. Again, that some of the ponies are now living in an alternate universe where Luna was alive, whereas they came from a universe where she died. I think there are two interpretations of this fic, depending on how seriously you want to take the Mandela Effect.
When did
That
we
is
get
actually-
into
Wow.
alternate what?
That was part of the Mandela Effect.
No, he's right. That's one of the big things that shows up in discussions of this as conspiracy theory, yes.
Yeah,
And
that's...
I actually think... Go ahead.
Sorry, continue.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's actually one of the strengths of this story, if I'm allowed to say as much, because it does lend itself to interpretation. It's just vague enough to let your own little Rorschach test of conspiracy theory slink on in.
Let me say
I
that
like
is-
that. I like the idea of them all slipping from one dimension to the next. That makes the story better for me, because previously, like I said, uninteresting. That's added a level of interest.
And see, that's where the story has a strength, is it allows the multiple interpretations. The crippling weakness of this story is that it does nothing to inform the reader that interpretation can exist. And if you haven't read so deeply into the Mandela Effect that you know it's about a Star Trek level of parallel universe shifting, you will not get that interpretation. And I don't think it would have been so hard to have someone in the story like Lyra say, it's all evidence that we've shifted from one universe to the other, or something like that. It wouldn't have been hard to include more information for the unfamiliar reader's benefit.
No,
Mami?
yeah, I will fight you on that one, because what I really I'm mad. I'm not mad. I really did enjoy this fic, specifically because it does not hand feed you everything that you could get out of it. Not to be shady, but a lot of fics will just tell you if they feel there's auxiliary information you should know going into it to be able to interpret it a certain way.
Info dump.
Yeah, where it can get to the point where it's like, here's a whole history lesson, and now you can try to enjoy the fic. And this fic does not treat the reader like they can't just do a Google search if they don't understand what the Mandela Effect is. You know, like, even if people went into it not understanding what the Mandela Effect is, we all found it pretty easily. It wasn't that hard to just look up and then get more out of it. And the fact that it can be interpreted multiple ways is very much something the author has designed. Like, I believe Forths has said in a couple of different blogs that there is a level of purposefulness to the word choice that goes into their fics, and that they do mean for people to be able to read different ways for each one, even the simple, silly little comedies like this one.
And I will push back on that just a bit, just because it's one of the choices that you have to make as a writer, to look at your audience and ask yourself, how much am I going to assume these people know? Because, the basic college example of this is if you're writing for college students, you don't want to give them the level of information that you would give a fourth grader. You'll just give them too much information and you'll bore them. My own view is that this story strayed too far on the side of assuming that its readers would know everything about the Mandela Effect, or at least know enough about it. Because, yeah, if you're, really involved in internet culture or conspiracy theory culture or any of that stuff, then you probably do have understanding of the Mandela Effect and all of the ideas associated with it. But if you're just a general level reader, especially on, a My Little Pony fan site, there's a pretty good chance you will have not come across the most in-depth discussions of this obscure conspiracy and physics phenomenon. So my own view is it strayed too far on assuming too much. But that's a choice that a writer has to make, and if they made it this way, then that is their prerogative. I just think that it was to its detriment in this particular case.
So the words Mandela Effect do not appear anywhere in the fic. There would have been nothing for a potential reader to look up on the internet to know that that was even a pun of that, because you search for Moondela Effect, you may or may not get a return result for Mandela Effect. Oh, it's a pun. I get it. But unless you read the comments,
if you put Moondela Effect into Google search, it won't even try to take you to the page that shows this fanfiction. It will just automatically assume you meant the Mandela Effect. So I would argue that the title itself is clue enough, because people would be like, what the fuck does Moondela Effect mean? Google it, and there you go.
the effect is so the story only works if the person is using Google as a default search provider, and Google's SEO is on point on that day.
I do have to say that if your defense is, okay, I wanted to assume a certain level of knowledge about the reader, and if that left a lot in the dust, I'm okay with that. That's a defense you can use in writing a story. If your defense is, oh, well, if you didn't understand, you need to do the research, that is something you cannot say as a writer. That's taking the wrong assumption and not doing the work on the part of your audience that you have taken on as a creator.
A point in Mami's favor, I did type Moondela Effect in Bing, and I still got redirected to Mandela Effect, so she might be onto something there.
Yeah, I mean, most search providers, most search providers that people are going to be using, the general audience that Thornquill brought up, is either going to be Google or Bing. I mean, I don't imagine a lot of kids are going to be using other search engines. So the majority of search engines that you use will still pull back that result for you. But I'm not even really arguing that you would need to know what the Moondela Effect is to be able to get something out of this fic. Part of it is just to taste. I enjoyed it before I even refreshed my memory on what the Mandela Effect was. So I think there is something here for a certain crowd, but there is another crowd that can get something out of it if they understand more about where the fic is based in.
Okay, does anybody have anything to add to this point before we move on?
Only one slight thing, which is that I'm going to weigh back in on Thornquill's side and say that if you're not only making assumptions about what your reader knows, you are also making assumptions about what your reader cares to find out. And asking them even to go and Google something simply based on the title of this, or Bing, or whatever other fucked up search engine you can come up with, it is too much to ask of the average reader to not just scroll past and go, fuck it.
I was going to counter with the idea that there are a lot of instances in even My Little Pony fanfiction specifically where people do assume that the reader has some knowledge. I mean, what if you reference an episode that someone hasn't seen? Or, what if you're talking about Applejack and you have to reference some part of farming and then people don't understand a certain aspect of that culture, or about farming culture, and then a joke that you make for people who know about that just breezes by the general audience. Like, I don't think every story needs to be written for a general audience. I think it can be that you can just write something for a particular group, and if not everyone gets something out of it, it doesn't have to be that way, But at the same time, I do understand where it's like, okay, well, that's more general knowledge. This is very much structured in, if you know what the Mandela Effect is, you can get more out of it, as is obviously evidenced by this podcast.
Yes, but on the other hand, the assumption that people know something about My Little Pony going into a My Little Pony fanfiction site is not equivalent to asking them to be familiar with a completely unrelated concept. Now, if we were talking about this as a story that appeared on a Mandela Effect conspiracy theory-centric blog, then that would be different. But I think those are apples and oranges arguments.
Duel me at dawn. I will fight you, because here's an example. I have a direct example, and it involves Scribbler too. There's a fic reading. You're getting into this. I'm dragging you back in. You did a fic reading on a story about an episode with Pinky and Fluttershy, where I don't remember what the fic was, but Pinky had done something wrong in the episode to Fluttershy. I think it was the one where she was having stage fright or something.
Philly Vanilli.
Yes, that one. And you read a fanfic about how Pinky didn't make it up to Fluttershy well enough or something. I had no idea what that fic was talking about because I didn't pay very well attention to that episode despite being a fan. So I had to go back into the episode and rewatch it to be able to understand it better, even though I am a fan and the fic is rooted in that. So people can be a fan of a show and read fan fiction for it, but if they don't understand what's being referenced, they're still not going to get it. And that was the premise of the entire fic.
Yeah, and see, this is what I was trying to get at when I was saying you have to think about your audience and try to think about what they know. When you're doing this, you're playing a gambling odds game. You always are. You're asking yourself, okay, who is likely to read this story, and what do I think those people know? If you're writing a story on a My Little Pony fan site, you can make the assumption that the average reader will be familiar with the material you're writing on, whether it be having viewed an episode or to some extent some of the fan lore, like an Octavia's personality or something like that. You will be wrong sometimes because some people just haven't encountered those ideas, but you're working with, I would say, 80 to 90% odds that you will succeed on that front. If you were to write a story, to go back to your other example of Applejack farming, you would again be working with a pretty good chance if you just reference a barn or a pasture or really surface level ideas of farming. You can reference those and you can assume that your readers will be familiar with the ideas. If you write about, and see, I don't know enough about farming, but if you write about some really obscure technical bit of farming, like a really specialty piece of equipment or a particular practice as related to animal husbandry or something that, especially in the modern era where we're not so much an agrarian society, your fic does need to do the work to help bring your readers into that understanding. It shouldn't spoon feed them, and it shouldn't read like a Wikipedia entry. And that's where the challenge comes in, is finding a way to bring them into that knowledge in a way that doesn't break the story.
Here's my argument for that. If we're talking about the fact that the general audience for this show is already going to be children, it's not obviously only comprised of children, but a lot of them will be, and part of your argument was, what if a child stumbles on the story? They're not going to know to Google the title. They're just going to read it and then not get as much out of it. A 5-year-old is not going to understand this fic anyways, not because it has any higher concept or anything, but because they're going to read it, be like, oh, Lyra Bonbon, and that's it. That's the end of it. Whereas an adult reader who may be confused by the fic and not understand it would look at the title and think, I don't know what that means. And then if they wanted to know more about it, if they even have the desire to understand more about the fic's premise, they could Google it, and then bam.
And I direct you again to the quotient of the population that will just say, fuck it.
I would say it's a good story even if they do.
Unfortunately, if you assume, okay, I'm not going to do this work, and I'm going to say that, the reading population has a responsibility to educate themselves to the level where they understand what I'm talking about, your reading population will never do that work. It's a really good ideal to say, of course, people should do this. People encountering a fic where they see things they don't understand should always go the extra mile and, just Google a few things. It's not that hard. The reality is, they will never do that, and you have to you have to do the work to help counter that.
We did, but to be fair, we were doing it for a podcast. I'll admit, if I just run across this, or if you had recommended this to me, Mami, as just a fun fic to read rather than reading it for a podcast, I probably would have read it and then just gone, and then moved on. I wouldn't have done an extra reading. I wouldn't. And I will freely admit that lazy part of me will have gone, that wasn't very good, and moved. Well, not physically moved, but I would have moved on. This fic is so bad, I must move house.
I really don't like using my own work as an example, but heteropaternal superfecundation, no one on fanfiction knows what those words mean. And a few chapters into the story, I have Sunburst explain it. He gets told to shut up immediately because he starts sounding like a Wikipedia entry, but since he's a scholarly character, he can get away with it as long as someone tells him to shut up. But that's how I handled that. I knew writing that story, no one on fanfiction is going to Google what heteropaternal superfecundation means. They might, just because it's so fucking out there as a weird word, but generally they're not going to do it.
I mean, not every fanfiction is going to be for everyone. Like, everyone has genres they don't like where you're not going to reach a certain crowd. So by the nature of writing a fic in the first place, there are going to be people that just aren't going to like what you write. And there's a crowd in here that doesn't like it unless they know about the Mandela Effect. I personally liked it, not even knowing about it. So I think to say that the general audience would either need to Google or not need to Google is too much of a generalization. Yeah, I think this could go either way for people.
You're right there. And basically, we're talking about a very specific aspect of writing this story, which is knowing your audience. And we haven't even talked about other reasons past the specific technical physics and conspiracy knowledge as to whether or not this story works. So maybe it's a good time to move on and just talk about, okay, we have the background of the Mandela Effect. Now let's look at everything else the story does.
I just want to say at this particular juncture that this is one of the reasons I love these podcasts. I love the amount of discussion that comes out of seemingly innocuous things. So thank you very much, Mami, for suggesting this one, if only because I kind of love the debate we're having.
Yeah, I knew it would be a debate, and it's kind of fun.
Righty. Okay, another can of worms. Our next talking point is characterization. How do we feel, well, do we feel it is accurate for the characters? Mami, I'm going to let you take this one to begin with.
Well, the main cast is side characters like Lyra and Bonbon. There's not really canon established personalities for them. Now you could get into the discussion of, do we feel it's accurate to fandom portrayals, or if it's supposed to be? Something I want to note about this fic is it's kind of either a running joke or something the author did that originally it was Octavia and Vinyl in this fanfiction. I don't know if that's like a joke someone started in the comments and they just ran with it, or if it was actually posted with Octavia and Vinyl as the main characters, and then later their names were changed.
Oh,
so
I
yeah.
wonder if
We've
he
done
originally
this
posted
before.
it. I wonder if he originally posted it with Vinyl and Octavia, and then changed the names.
Yeah,
That would be super clever.
at
That's
the
like
very
Bonafide all over again, but in reverse.
For the sake of argument, let's presume that that's the author actually did that.
just because it's so awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
At the very least, it's enough of a running gag in the comments. I think people would believe that it happened. And that's, a made a joke. There you go. It's a good fake, I swear. Yeah, I mean,
if the author did that and that turned out to be a one trick pony, if it was like a one trick fic where he originally published it with Vinyl Scratch and Octavian and later changed the names, that would make this fic completely worthwhile. Not
Would it
gonna lie.
though? Because
That would completely change my opinion of the entire fic.
would it? Because any of us who's coming here and looking at it now, we won't know the joke. All we'll have is some bizarre comment telling us that was the case.
it's like a whole string of comments.
How very clever of the author to integrate elements of the story's comments. How very meta of the author to do that and forward.
There you go.
Oh dear.
Sorry, I just wasn't expecting that.
I wasn't.
From Cygnus.
But that's about the most coherent
Cygnus of all
argument that you
people.
can have about that. I mean, come on.
Oh,
It wouldn't be the first time that we've seen authors do something meta like that, integrate bits of the comments into their story, or
And that is not a strength. That's a weakness. If you're not proud enough of
I
No,
disagree.
if you're not proud enough of your story to stand by it on the grounds that you originally published it on, that is on you.
It's just a joke.
It's just a joke. I thought it was funny. Mammy thought it was funny.
Anyways, yeah, I don't know.
I just like the
It's
raspberry.
not so much. Also funny.
You're very
I
welcome.
just like the silly mouth noises.
I was just looking at like some more reviewed information from Titanium Dragon on this fiction when all of a sudden I just hear a loud fart sound effect and everybody starts laughing and then they're like, oh, it was Cygnus, and I'm like, really? And I'm just like not sure where to come into the conversation at all in all this.
It's our own Mandela Effect. We've actually just shifted universes to a place where Cygnus habitually makes fart jokes.
I beg your pardon. Habitually, indeed.
Exactly, we've shifted back into our own.
Oh my goodness.
The universe twanged back into place at this precise moment, and we're all just feeling the ripple effect.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, you can't mischaracterize Lyra and Bonbon. You can break fandom expectation, but I don't really think there's any canon ponies in here to worry about. So, yeah, the characterization's fine.
Oh, right. The original question you asked. Right.
I'm having a hard time imagining Octavia as a baker.
I don't know. I like the idea that Octavia sometimes does something so antithetical to music to relax, but that's pure headcanon.
My headcanon is that Octavia is gluten intolerant.
Where did that come from?
I don't know.
It's representation.
Interesting. It's definitely interesting. Wow.
I will agree with Mami on characterization. In general, I felt it was fine. I actually feel like this Lyra and Bonbon read more like the fanon interpretation of them than they did in Bonafide. Lyra being the more crazy one and Bonbon being a bit more grounded because she's an earth pony.
We are indeed this. Ha ha ha. Earth Popey representation.
Earth poopy.
That is not what I said.
It's that croissant you were eating earlier.
That croissant, that was an earth poopy. Straight
We
from
are
an
not
earth
going
elemental.
down this rabbit hole. I fucking refuse.
Scribbler ate shit before the podcast.
Context for those listening. Yes, context for those listening. I actually am going to provide context. Otherwise, people are going to have terrible mental images of me. I was eating before the podcast, and I posted a picture of a croissant because it looked weird, and everybody started making jokes about it looking like various things, including fecal matter and a penis. There we go.
Implying that you are going to leave this in whatsoever.
You realise I probably am. I might bleep myself, but I probably am going to be.
She probably is. She's probably not even going to bleep herself. She never has, as far as
and-
I know.
Yeah, well...
And croissant, for our American listeners, is how Scribbler says croissant. Apparently.
I'm American, and
No.
we Americans know what croissants are.
But it's a croissant. What do you mean croissants? what is this
Oh
bullshit?
god, you're the mom from Star Versus.
No, I've never heard of croissant.
Where
Except when
is
people
the
are taking the piss.
Croissant.
Where
It's
is
a
the
French
W in that
pastry.
word?
It's a French word.
Croissant.
Remember, Scribbler,
Yeah.
they don't have the benefit of culture.
Ho, ho, ho.
And suddenly Neighrator has become the cook out of the Little Mermaid.
Give me that fan art right now.
Considering you've just voiced Sebastian the Crab for me, that means that you are effectively both halves of that scene now.
Oh, great.
Great, now I'm imagining him like as the chef and his head on Sebastian the Crab.
Yes,
Like a
yes,
vine.
And specifically that head that we used earlier.
yes.
God.
Yes.
You want some fuck?
I'm not providing any context for that one.
So yeah, the Moondela Effect.
Pro
Is a thing.
style.
You're not
And-
getting out of that.
Pro style. What did
I'm
we
not
think
familiar
about the pro style of this fic, you guys? Who would like to go first?
Not Scribbler, because she's dead over there somewhere.
Stop laughing. Somebody
I-
else has to take over.
I actually have something to say about the pro style, so I'll get it
Yes,
said
please,
real
Tony.
quick
Go ahead.
before everything else devolves again. The pro style I thought was it was pretty good. I did have some issues with just that all of the characters tended to turn on a dime emotionally again, but in this case I give it a bit more of a pass since it's a comedy and I assume it was being played more for comedic effect. But the pacing did feel a little bit off to me. I don't know if anyone else felt that.
I did. Piss. Hang on. There we go. I kind of. I don't feel like the story needed anything more than the final scene, if that makes sense. You know, you have your entire build-up and punchline within the course of Lyra's little rally there at the end. Everything that you need to know about the politics or the deeper philosophy of the story, you can get from that, and the rest is just so much fluff. I mean, average fluff, completely inoffensive fluff, but fluff nonetheless.
I would say you need the fluff to get the story. It's like a good Nutter Flutter sandwich.
It is.
I'm sorry. Did you say Nutter Flutter? Nutter. Say it again.
Yeah.
It's Fluffer Nutter.
Nutter
Okay,
Flutter.
I
What
thought-
the fuck? This is going to be another example of the Mandela Effect. It's
That's
fucking
what I was
Nutter
about to
Flutter.
say!
This is an example of Fluttershy nutting.
Oh.
No.
Hey,
No,
Jesus.
out bad.
Cygnus, what did you think
That's
about
a different
the
kind of
pro style?
sandwich.
I just said, Neighrator.
I just was trying to move on in the panic. As for my part, the pro style I really thought was it kind of hit and miss. I guess like it did seem to drag a bit, and I think the author might have in places just been kind of trying to fill 4,000 words. I think pretty much the whole story can be summed up in just like Pony's experience, the Mandela Effect, and that's the fic. So, any other final notes on pro style since I'm in charge while Scribbler's saving something from being murdered in her garden?
Is the pro style everything in that section of the document? Like, how does the story read? Is it trying to achieve something, or are we going to discuss each of those individually?
I think
Go
we're just
for it.
kind of discussing it in bulk. Like, I already kind of
Yeah, in
mentioned
bulk.
how I thought the pacing was going for the more comedic tone, and that I don't know that it worked quite as well for me. I will declare a bit of reader bias. I don't generally go for comedy stories, and I can't write them for shit. Okay, I'll say that. So they're just not my cup of tea. But in this case, it didn't quite work for me in the end, regardless.
You are, however, very good at
I-
writing comedy in your drama.
Yes, when everyone is hurting and in miserable pain, I can throw in a comedic moment. But as for writing a truly comedic fic, I cannot do it.
I can. Comedy is just one of those things that I just have plenty of references and jokes for. But as for the pro style of this story, how does the story read? It reads like a roller coaster. It's like one of those things where you're just watching something. Like, I don't know how to describe it. What I'm trying to go for as the metaphor here, as something crashing and burning, and you're just watching it get worse and worse, and there's nothing you can do about it. And at the end, it doesn't resolve itself.
I thought it was a lazy stroll to a pretty sunset, and Midori's over here thinking it's a huge crash exploding on the horizon.
Okay, that's just funny.
I like this fic.
That's funny because I'm in between the two of you. I thought that it was going for that just escalate, train wreck kind of comedic effect, but that it didn't go far enough. I wanted it to be more frantic, more insane, more over the top as time went on, and just for Lyra to completely go bananas by the end of it. And it never hit that pace for me. So I don't know.
Great.
That's funny that you both interpreted it as a slower pace than either of us, and that worked for you.
Great. I'm just imagining a mental image of me, Thornquill, and Mami side by side watching a train go off in the distance and explode. And Mami's like, "Oh, what a lovely sunset." And I'm like, "Oh my God, they're all dead." And
I'm just in
Thornquill
the
is
middle
like,
here saying, meh.
No, Thornquill, you're like, I mean, it could have been on fire.
Yes!
That's pretty accurate, actually. I'll be honest.
So yeah, I don't know that I have much more to add on that point, but
Comedy. Is this a good example of how to write a comedic short story? What are some
I'm
essential
back.
elements of a good comedic short? We're on point 6, Scribbler.
Okay, I am now the proud owner of a gigantic fucking dead rat.
Congratulations.
welcome to
This
cat
thing is
ownership.
This thing is like as big as my forearm. He's had to import it from the canal because they don't come big like that around here. Which means he's carted this fucking big rat alive up the hill to my garden to kill it and give it to me.
He loves
He's on
So
you.
proud of himself. He was so proud.
He saw that croissant and he was like, you could do better.
Yeah, actually. That would explain why he left it in a curve.
Like, this is
It's
how
a
you do
rat-
it.
What
it's
is
a
that, a
rat
curve?
croissant. This is a croissant, Mami.
Something like that.
Croissant.
Yeah.
Ugh.
To be fair, Scribbler, would you rather have it running around?
It didn't belong in my garden. It wouldn't have been running around. Oh, God. I mean, the fox or the badger would have had it later, and I've laid it down by the shed so they can collect it on their way in. Like, oh, fast food.
Very considerate of you.
That's what I do with everything the cat kills. He's like, right, I'm going to put it here because I know the fox can dart his head in, grab it, and run away. Otherwise, the cat has this habit of beating him up.
Pussycat's was like, this is the thanks I get. I work and I mouse and I rat. Anyway.
And you give it to the thing I beat up to stay out of the garden.
Life in the English country, everyone.
Righty. So, 6? Wow, you got through that many points.
Well, 5 was done at the start of the podcast.
Yeah, we were long since done with that one, so we skipped right over it.
Right, so you did 4 impressions of pro style, 1.6. Okay, comedy. All right. You're going to have to remind me, all of you. What the fuck? Okay, the cat's at the window now. MP, take over. He's going to pee on something if I don't move. No!
Daddy MP, you're in charge.
Every single podcast is sabotaged by some animal. 90% of the time it's the cat, but occasionally a squirrel. Anyways, I mean, we've already kind of...
Thorny, go first.
We've already
the squirrel.
We've already kind of touched on comedy a little bit. I was just kind of interested in hearing more, just because, like I said, comedy's not really my thing. I will say, just kind of continuing on my point about how I was expecting a more frantic pace, I would have been interested to see this kind of in more of a style of like the story Twilight Sparkle Gets a Free Salad, where
slowly coming unhinged, everything just going completely over the top. Like I said, everything could have been on fire. That was Midori's, actually. I'm not going to steal credit for that brilliant line. And honestly, I was thinking that this story could have been written from Twilight's perspective. She's the one who could have gone all over the top wacko science on parallel universes and what the various implications of the Mandela Effect could be, and how everyone is living in an alternate universe and they don't even know it, and eventually destroying Equestria trying to persuade everyone of the fact. That was more the kind of comedy that I was wanting from this story.
You just want Twilight Eats a Salad with blackjack and hookers.
I mean, I was thinking more of flames and explosions, but yeah, if we're speaking euphemistically...
Like she said, blackjack and hookers.
That would have been one direction the author could have taken the story, Thorny. But like I said, if the author did it that way, then he wouldn't have been able to edit, then find a place across the whole story and change Octavia to Bonbon and Lyra to a Vinyl Scratch and edited it after the fact, which, as I've said, I believe firmly that the author has done, and which is a brilliant comedic move.
If you believe it enough, it makes it true.
There's a raspberry again.
We're in that dimension again.
Just replace all of Cygnus's lines with that noise.
Yeah, you'd like that.
Cygnus is now Flufflepuff.
Oh my god, yeah.
Our fluffy little British.
Out. You are all done.
He's back.
Cygnus, why don't you go next, since you have such strong feelings about comedy?
With regards to comedy, yeah, no. I mean, as I said right at the beginning of this whole mess, no, I think that it would have worked best, again, as kind of just a two-person, one-scene sort of shtick. You know, just having the two go back and forth and berate each other for not thinking what they believe to be the right thing. I don't think that it necessarily would have required all of Equestria being destroyed in flames and blackjacks and hookers. Apparently Scribbler is in charge now.
I'm in charge!
For once.
Yeah.
For it to be funny, Thornquill. But I do see your point. I don't think this was really much of one thing or the other. It really did just feel like it's... This is one of the few times I'm going to find myself agreeing with Titanium Dragon, heretical as that may be, that this is just the Mandela Effect retold through the lens of Pony, and there's nothing funny or tragic or particularly insightful about that. And I think that's just where I'm going to sit on basically the next two questions.
Aaron, can we just talk about, like, the beauty that this was reviewed as not recommended by someone, and it's in the summary of the fic?
Yeah,
Yep.
they were very proud of
Bold.
that. Like, oh, hey, not recommended. Hey, guys, check it out. My story's not recommended. Thumbs up.
No, seriously.
I get the feeling from the way that they were interacting in the comments of Titanium Dragon's blog that they're actually friends.
Yeah, this person likes it when their fics are reviews, so I don't imagine that much offense was taken to the recommendation, but I just love that if you look at the fic in like bold letters, the first thing you see is not recommended.
I wonder how it's going to react to our podcast!
In any event, though, that is how you deal with negative criticism, and this author has serious class.
For real.
Okay, so would anyone like to weigh in more on the comedy aspect of things? Obviously, I came into this partway through, so I don't know who's spoken and who hasn't.
In the end, comedy is always subjective. Some people find certain kinds of comedy funny. Some people find other types of comedy funny, like dark comedy, for example. I look at dark comedy, a lot of dark comedy that some of my friends like to laugh their butts off at, and I'm just like, that's legitimately horrible. You are all horrible people for that, and that just makes them laugh more. So
are you just describing us at this point?
No,
Shane.
I'm not describing you guys at all.
Wow.
I've seen some really bad stuff, like sometimes it just goes too far for me. This story, I wouldn't call it a dark comedy, but it is a different kind of comedy from my personal taste. It's not random. It's just like a kind of level of stupid that I just really didn't enjoy personally.
Here's the thing. I think that this does work as a comedy. I don't think it works as an over-the-top comedy. And I don't think it needs to be one. Because I know a lot of people find, stories like Twilight Eats a Salad or whatever to be hilarious. And they are. I mean, it was a good fic, but I very much picked this because I like slower-paced fics that kind of take their time with things and don't really get too caught up being over the top, because you get so much of that on fanfiction that it was kind of a nice reprieve. I also picked it because I just like Forths as an author. I think they're very capable. This fanfic isn't very exemplary of their usual work. A lot of it is introspective or, just cute little ship fics or something. They're a very good writer in terms of style, but as a comedy, I don't think it needs to be too much to still work.
Okay, so little reprieve here from the review of itself. What are some of Forth's other stories that we should read? If you had to make a blanket recommendation to us of things that really do exemplify Forth's strengths, what would you recommend?
If you're looking for like atmosphere and just like the fic equivalent of a nice warm cup of tea on a rainy day, I think it's her most recent one. The one about Sunset and Twilight is really, really good. It's about them being in a long-distance relationship while Twilight's in college. And even if the dialogue isn't always what I would attribute to their characterization, there's these little moments. Forths is really good at just capturing these little bites of slice of life. I think slice of life is really the strength with this author. So the slice of life fics especially are exactly what you should read if you're just having a crap day and you just want something that's like nice and smooth to wash it all down. In terms of introspection and something that gives you more to think about, because that is something that Forth likes to write, there was a fic that she wrote. I can't remember the title of it, but it is on one of her blog posts where it was written, I think, as not an Anon in Equestria story, but as like a human in Equestria story. And it very much goes into the concept of grief, but in a world that isn't our world. And it was based on a song, but you don't have to have listened to the song to understand the fic. So that one I would be interested in to read, because I haven't read it yet, but supposedly there's a lot of metaphor and stuff in it.
Okay, so I will try and make sure that those links go in the description. For those listening, go and read them. Forth is not a bad author. I've seen her, I'm going to go with the pronoun her, on several recommended lists before. This is the first time I've encountered her work, though, so might be worth checking out for some other stuff. Does anybody want to talk about the comedy anymore before we move on?
I will ask one more question, Mami, because I really do want to know if you have any examples of moments in this fic that you feel really did work for you, and maybe some thoughts on why they worked. And I mean, especially on that second point, don't blame you if not, because that's really weirdly analytical to try to analyze comedy, and I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, you're not putting me on the spot. I'm one of the people, maybe one of the only people in this podcast who actually really enjoyed all of this fic. I kind of like the meta aspect to it, where a lot of it reads more as a joke if you understand the context of it. But before I knew that context when I was reading it, there were just these little parts where a character did something silly. I can't remember anything exactly, where they just turn on their head, kind of like Midori was talking about. And I thought that was funny. It didn't need to be, and then something exploded. It can just be, and then this character did something really stupid. And I found that to be good. There is a part later on in the discussion that we're having about confirmation bias. I thought that the commentary it might be taking on that was funny to me personally, just from my opinions in real life. So I did enjoy that.
Okay, yeah, and shoot, my thought is trying to get away from me.
Bring it back.
And this
Shoot the thought, shoot it!
Shoot her.
This story did I'm not trying to say that I absolutely did not enjoy this story at all. Honestly, my reception to it was best described as lukewarm, but it did give me a chuckle here and there, and it was definitely those moments where the characters were going into full-on irrational behavior, and like you said, just turning around and doing something crazy. That's more that I was wanting more of. So yeah, thanks for that.
Okay then, we shall move on. Point number 7, tragedy. What exactly makes this story a tragedy, and what defines a tragedy in terms of fiction? This was originally Goombasa's. I'm assuming that G means. And unfortunately, he could not be here. Therefore, who would like to take this one first?
I'll take it.
Go on then, Mami.
Yeah, might as well. I just feel like a soldier defending this fic. I think it does work as a tragedy.
Welcome to Thorny's world!
I know, right? I never understood, but now I do.
Welcome to my world.
This is also how Goombasa felt in his. It's such a shame he can't be here to see this group of you, this little support network group getting bigger.
We're gonna start a club, you lot are vultures.
Oh, Midi's gonna find this out next week because she's the only one who can pick a fic now.
Oh yeah. Just you wait.
Am I?
Well, just remember that indictment of the
fine.
fic. Remember that indictment of the fic is not indictment of either the author or the person who picked it.
Exactly.
Trust me, I don't. And the fic that I have lined up for you guys, I don't think that I'm going to be bothered whether you guys hate it or not. It's just going to be fun to see your reactions.
Oh, jeez.
Because that's not at all portentous.
Oh dear. Well then, tragedy.
Fucking hell.
Tragedy.
Oh,
right.
that is telling that we're talking
The
about
fate of
fucking
every
tragedy.
fic picker.
Good lord, the grackle fucking squawk up there.
Vultures, I tell you.
Ooh. At the very least, we're hyenas.
Yeah. Anyways, tragedy.
Can I be a spotted hyena?
You stop that?
Of course you can,
stop
dear.
that.
He's a spotted hyena sphinx.
Anyways, tragedy. Tragedy. I will fight you, Midori. Let me. Tragedy.
Sorry, the noise you made sounded like you were literally pulling her away from the mic.
I am on a metaphysical level. I astral projected and yanked her away.
Pseudo penis.
Tragedy. In terms of tragedy, Cygnus, don't you start. I am the mom of the group. I will put you in the corner.
You have become the most mature person here.
I resent
I
that.
don't want this fic to turn into a 3 hours long podcast. I picked a short one specifically so it would be short.
But you said yourself that we're vultures.
Oh god, you're right. I should have known. I don't know why I expected. Anyway,
Tragedy.
You're all on my shit list right now. I swear to God. Tragedy. Yes, it works as a tragedy. I don't think it works as a tragedy in the sense that a lot of people are familiar with. I think there are parts that I brought up earlier where there is that bit where her father is having trouble remembering her girlfriend's name, or that Bonbon is her girlfriend. And while that is played for a bit of a joke, maybe to some people, I do also read by the paragraph that followed it about how Lyra's thinking, oh, I really should be visiting them. My parents are getting up there in the years and so much time is flying by. Right, the moon thing. I feel like there's a bit of fridge tragedy in the fact that her father clearly has some kind of Alzheimer's or something. So if you take that, you can almost run with the idea that her being so dedicated to his interpretation of these events is linked to her knowing that he doesn't have much time left and almost wanting to defend his ideas. Because something Thornquill brought up earlier that I thought was interesting was the fact that in terms of his interpretation of the whole Berenstain Bears conspiracy or whatever, it was passed through his family that it was spelled a certain way. The same thing goes on with Lyra in this fic. Her dad is the one who tells her that what just happened on the radio was that Luna had died. And then years later, that's what she runs with. And other people had believed it too. So you can get into the idea of, when we talk about confirmation bias later, is this something that's being passed down? Are there ulterior motives to people defending this idea so strongly past just them wanting to be right? So I think there's a bit of tragedy in that, to reel back around to the fucking top of the conversation. And also the Lyra bond element. I originally wanted to ask if we think that they stay together at the end of this fic, because I don't think they do. And I think it has to do with the fact that there is such a sudden and strong divide between them. So in terms of their relationship, which was the opener of the fic, I think it works as a tragedy because they don't stay together. And it's because of the way that Lyra goes about her whole day, all the nonsense she gets into and how fucking stupid she is.
That's actually a very interesting idea, a very interesting point, because Lyra doesn't go to her classes or whatever she's supposed to be doing. She gets so devoted to this crazy ideal and goes so off the rails on it and is so super stubborn, even at the end of the story when proof flies up in her face. And the idea that Bonbon just wouldn't be able to put up with that, wouldn't be able to put up with her continuing to procrastinate what her responsibilities actually are and whatnot, that just really actually blows my mind a little bit, what you just said.
Right? You just gotta think about it a little bit. If you just believe me, I'm always right.
That has nothing to do with anything else in the story. How dare you, Mom?
Yes.
I think that's the third time Cygnus has gone into his microphone.
And I'll keep doing it too. No, I don't think that works nearly as well as you're trying to sell it. Again, no offense to you. But the most you can say in terms of tragedy in this story is that people are idiots. That's it. Every idiot crusades alone. Yes, I'm absolutely sure that Lyra and Bonbon are not going to be together after this, but I don't care, because Lyra has proved herself to be a complete idiot throughout the course of this story, and she deserves no pathos from me.
Well, the question isn't if you care, it's if it works.
Well,
so if you can see it, it works.
You know what? And I point you once again to that fuck it quotient, which you may have determined by now I find myself sitting in. But no, I also didn't get anything about there being more of a deeper meaning to the father's forgetfulness, other than perhaps that what Thornquill said before, that he's not quite as good on the memory front as anyone would like to believe, or that Lyra would like to believe to form the basis of her little conspiracy theory. But again, no, I as with the comedy, I don't really see much tragedy here in the grander sense, apart from, again, people are stupid, people do stupid things, and people believe stupid things. But that's not really a tragedy, that's just a statement of fact.
I will point out, I think that Fourths was at some point, or is, a lit major. So a term I've seen her throwing around is a tragicomedy. I think if there had been a tag tragicomedy, that's what would have been on this fic, rather than separately comedy and tragedy. So it kind of takes on like a Shakespearean vibe where, yeah, there's a lot of stupidity going on, but the stupidity is the tragedy.
Midori?
I did say before we started this entire thing that the tragedy of this whole thing was simply that everybody is a freaking idiot in this story, and it ends with everybody still as an idiot at the end of the story. But something that Cygnus mentioned, that whole thing with the father just almost feeling like it doesn't really it might not grab everybody as some sort of a deeper meaning or signal or whatever, and that actually reminds me of something else that I wanted to talk about in the story. Something that happens that isn't really addressed at all, and that is when Lyra goes to see Lemon Hearts. She goes to this royal district or whatever, where like they play up what the royal district is, and it's full of a lot of old ponies and like ponies that are like really up there in age, and anybody that lives there has lived there for generations, and there's a bunch of abandoned houses. Like, when I read this part, it almost felt like something out of the room. It's like, and all these abandoned houses and all these old ponies. Oh, hi, Lemon Heart.
The fuck is that accent?
Yours.
Tommy
Cygnus.
was
Like, seriously,
Oh my
like,
God.
why did we go to this royal district and like describe all this stuff, and then all of a sudden, oh, hi, Lemon Hearts.
What exactly? She's got a good point. What exactly was the significance of all the emphasis placed on that?
I thought it was genuine. I genuinely thought it was going to lead up to the fact that like Lemon Hearts was the editor of the Tribune or something, but it didn't seem to go anywhere.
Maybe it's trying to say that Lemon Hearts herself is like as mentally deficient as somebody who has Alzheimer's.
Maybe.
Okay.
I don't know. Like, I'm just trying to like justify the reason why Lemon Hearts is living in this area with the description that they gave it.
Viz, everyone is an idiot.
It's as good an explanation as any.
Mami?
I think you're actually on the right track, sort of. I think there is significance to writing that Lemon Hearts lives in a very old neighborhood, because if you look at the plot progression of the fic, for what relative little there is, we see a lot of this idea of Princess Moon having been killed years ago being passed down by older folks to younger folks. We see it with Lyra's dad to her. Lemon Hearts believes this too and goes along with it. She lives in a very old community. And then later on, we see the apparent friend insert or whatever, just cameo appearance of the father figure, who then passes on this idea to his daughter. I think it was his daughter who was like, "Oh, do you want to color and make some signs for us that say that Princess Luna should be dead or died years ago?" She doesn't understand what that means or what she's doing.
It was no more Moon Princess, and Princess Luna is a fake.
Yes. So she doesn't understand what that
Fake
means.
news.
Well, there it is.
Also, I want to say something real quick. I might have worded something really badly back there without meaning to, like in trying to like formulate what I was trying to say. In like, I might have made it sound like people that have Alzheimer's are mentally deficient. That wasn't what I was trying to say, and I apologize to anybody that has Alzheimer's. That's not what I was trying to say.
Nah, you're fine.
Duly noted.
I will chime in on that point very briefly, just because of the one interpretation of the story and Lyra's father and Lemon Hearts that has been brought up. If the story is trying to say that these characters have memory problems and that's the reason for them acting crazy, I would actually have a very serious issue with that. I've lost my grandfather to Alzheimer's. I've lost an aunt to dementia. And if the implication is that these characters are suffering from that and this story is dealing with that as an element of comedy, that would be a very serious problem. And I mean, Mami, you just agreed with Midori that could be a very interesting interpretation of Lemonheart's character. So,
Oh, no. I wasn't saying that I thought that Lemonhearts had Alzheimer's. Because, I mean, I've lost Bill to Alzheimer's, too. No, I was just going with the idea that, her being surrounded by old people, and not every old person has Alzheimer's. I was just running with the idea that maybe her being in an old neighborhood made her kind of, soak in that culture enough that she believed things that, had she not been around them, she may not have believed otherwise.
Okay, I can see that interpretation more. And yeah, the neighborhood is an interesting one. So, if that's the effect the author was going for, I could see that again. I would have appreciated a bit more narrative clarity. Because honestly, my interpretation was I actually wrote a scene almost exactly like this again in Heteropaternal Superfecundation. I spent an entire chapter, describing the history of an industrial area in Manhattan, and just how its wealth had gone away, its factories had gone to ruin. I spent an entire couple of paragraphs just describing a derelict typewriter factory because I had just read about one and was like, oh, this looks like it would fit in this setting. And I cut.
How dare you have fun writing?
Well, see, that's the thing. I cut the entire chapter because it went nowhere. And I knew it went nowhere when I was writing it. It was how to say? I fulfilled the same purpose with a couple of lines of dialogue in a different chapter later. I had to write the scene to figure out what I was trying to feel about what I was doing at the time, what kind of emotions I was trying to evoke and where I was trying to take these characters. But really, I also wrote it just because I was interested in the area and its industrial decline. And that part didn't belong in the story. And I kind of felt that the author went on a much shorter meander through this neighborhood themselves because it interested them. And that's not wrong, but I don't know if it meant anything deeper, but I do like your interpretation, Mami.
Okay, our next point is, how is the media and its influence on public opinion represented in this fic? Could this be a social commentary on current issues, particularly confirmation bias and criticism of the press? Mami, you made this point, so you have to take it first.
This could get real heavy real fast, so we can.
Okay.
I mean, it's hard to comment on current issues, but I do think that's something this fic tries to deal with. And I'm not even just talking about, the obvious parallel of fake news, even if I think that's something that it does touch on, because the whole story of Princess Moon having died is specifically referred to as, I can't believe they took on such an obviously fake story. They're usually so much better than that. So I do feel like there's an intentional parallel to current events in terms of that popular culture bit, but something I was really interested in was the idea of confirmation bias, especially when it came to the narrative. Because
do you want to explain what confirmation bias is for listeners who might not know?
Right, yeah. Confirmation bias is when you're trying to make an argument and you already believe in what you're trying to argue without really knowing if it's true. So you look up sources that confirm what you already believe. You're not interested in finding out if what you believe is actually right. You're interested in proving that your initial belief was the correct one to have. So I think that's what Lyra does when she thinks that she must be right, that this broadcast happened years ago and obviously Princess Luna must actually be dead, rather than go to a more reputable source where she could look and see, okay, am I wrong? She goes to the person who told her that it was true and says, that happened, right? And then her dad's like, oh yeah. And she's like, oh, I knew it. I was right. I'm not crazy. And that keeps happening throughout the fic. And I thought that was an interesting take on something that I think happens a little too often these days.
I actually do like that interpretation. I think for me to really go for it, again, I would want it made a little bit stronger. I think what Lyra would have really needed for that to work is a foil. And this is something that I find odd just in how the fic is structured in general, is that Lyra and Bonbon are generally foils to each other, but they spend almost the entire story completely apart. I actually was noting down my frustration while reading this because I was thinking, okay, so these ponies are perfectly happy taking a memory of a decades-old radio broadcast as gospel, but they're not willing to accept modern broadcasts as evidence whatsoever. And that feeds perfectly into your interpretation, so I think you figured out something there, whereas it was just going over my head. I would have liked to have seen Bonbon doing more to represent the other side of that. Going back, trying to find more evidence, piecing together articles and whatnot, trying to find the original source and all of that. I think that would have made Lyra's actions a lot more clearly defined and even ridiculous. Whereas with what we have, we are kind of left stumbling around confused, like, we're just following this one character off, just following kind of a nonsense path, and we don't have anything to play off of it in our own minds, if that makes sense.
Needy, do you want to weigh in?
I don't really have anything to weigh in with because I don't know a lot of what's been said, and I don't really have a lot to say on this. Just that I myself was very frustrated with a lot of the story. I agree with a lot of what Thornquill said there, and it's a little bit frustrating to actually know that Luna is in fact real, and none of these people will accept that. They don't know that, and I just wanted them to really realize that this whole matter was pointless at the end, but that's not what happens. But we'll get into discussing the ending in the next point.
Well, and maybe the author wanted us to feel frustrated. That might have been the point. Again, I think having Bonbon represent a different viewpoint, that would have made us as readers feel like our frustration was intentional and grounded. As it is, we kind of feel separated from the fic.
That's a good point.
If that was the intent, yes. If that was the intent, and Thornquill, I will grant that was my interpretation going through this as well, that the author was intending for us to be incredibly angry with the idiots and the assholes of the world who simply will not see evidence when it is put in front of them, to tie in number 9. It was not competently done. It was not competently done enough for me to feel anything other than the same kind of frustration that I get when I look out the window. And personally, I don't get much out of that. Viz, everyone is an idiot. I don't need any more confirmation of that to, play off the confirmation bias aspect of that just a little bit. I would much rather, as you said, see something, or as Midori said, see something to the effect that, people do see the manifestation of the nightly goddess up in the moon-drenched sky and suddenly find themselves transported and enlightened and all of that wonderful stuff. It would be far nicer to me if we had an optimistic ending to this, as opposed to one where the idiot looks her best friend, her mare friend in the eye, and renounces reason.
That is an unfortunate reality.
I don't disagree, but with what we have here, with what we are given to work with, I would argue that even then it could be more competently done. You could have had, again, as was suggested, more time demonstrating that the two are foils, more time explaining and exploring the two different perspectives of the issue. The problem with the confirmation bias, Aesop, in this story is that the story itself expresses a confirmation bias towards the assumption that confirmation bias will exist. Does that make any sense?
It twisted my head, but I followed, yes.
Okay. The idea that there would be no questioning within the cadre that already believed in the thing that they were experiencing a confirmation bias towards, that it would proceed in the course of a day, let us not forget, in the course of in the space of time between the morning when the broadcast comes out and the evening when the moon does, that this would somehow, for the wonderful little ponies of Ponyville and Canterlot and wherever the fuck else, I don't even remember that this was explained particularly well, would suddenly go on this huge bandwagon. I'm just not convinced that any of this story works, even for the incredibly depressing and bleak commentary that it's trying to go for, and I would argue failing.
Well, it's not all of them that go with it either. Lyra's crowd is very much like a crowd of diehard fanatics, and you could argue that Lyra did try to question it in her own way at the very start. She did look for confirmation. The problem is she looked for it in an unreliable source, someone who doesn't remember things very well as it is, so may just go, oh yeah, that sounds right, so of course, yeah, that happened. And also, someone who told her to begin with, even back when they did remember things a little more clearly. She went to a source that could not possibly tell her, oh no, that's not a thing that happened. So I don't think it's that the commentary is people don't ever question anything. I think it's the commentary that diehard fanatics might question things, but where you look for your answer can entirely change your perspective.
Which is all well and good, but again, we didn't see any of the grey area, even, within the park scene, for example. The only things that the only ponies that you saw at that point were ponies who already believed. There was no mention of, even a passing bystander going, what the fuck's that about? No, none of it. You had the camps laid out from the very beginning of the story. There was no gray area. It was intended to be a total binary, and there is no such thing. I mean, as much as and sorry for this, Scribbler, as much as anyone wants to argue that is the only thing that we have in the world today is black and white, is left and right, good and bad, whichever side of that divide you fall on, that is not how the world works, and it offends me on a base level when a story takes that assumption as gospel. I cannot do it, I'm sorry.
I don't think it does. There is a bit with Bonbon, and this plays back into Bonbon being a foil. She almost works on a different level as a foil. She isn't a direct, her behavior is so much different from Lyra's. She does still look for confirmation in her own sources in a similar way to Lyra, where she's like, I mean, obviously she's crazy, right? Oh yeah, she's definitely crazy. But there is a part where she's walking down Canterlot Street or something like that, and she sees a newsstand, and the person peddling the news doesn't give a crap about what's going on. And he's like, I don't care. I don't give a shit what's right. I'm just trying to sell newspapers. I have no investment in this beyond my own gain. So there is a neutral party, and they do kind of dabble in why other people might be supporting this crazy idea outside of just flat believing it. But I do agree that I wish we had seen a little more of that. I get that for such a short fic, maybe that was all we really needed for the word length. I don't know if she was trying for a certain word limit or something, but if it had been a little bit longer and touched on that a little bit more, I would have liked it better. But we do get at least a brief passing glimpse of there are other reasons why people would go along with this horse shit. It's just not necessarily that people would be like, oh, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, and then look into it on their own. It also has a commentary on sources themselves and whether or not they're biased, because everyone emphasizes that certain newspapers are unquestionably right. Bonbon says, oh, well, this newspaper is usually so much better. There's no way that they would falsify a story. But then if you look at the dude peddling the local paper, he's like, oh, no, yeah, my job is to sell papers. So that's what I do. And that could call into question how the other papers conduct themselves, because even if they fact check, they do still have to sell papers. So that's part of why I put in that criticism of the press, Brit, is I think there's a little bit more there where you're talking about how the need to generate a profit can interfere with commitment to the truth.
I'm actually with you there. I do think that's why the author included that bit, and why. And I think it was. I thought it was reasonably effective, as a matter of fact.
I was going to bring up that newspaper guy when Cygnus mentioned a gray area, like that newsstand guy definitely felt like a gray area. It's like, I don't care. I'm just trying to sell papers. I don't care what people think. I don't care what it makes people think. This is just a chance for me to make money.
I would characterize him as being someone on the bonbon side of the equation, though. I would not characterize that as a gray area. You know, because he doesn't just say, fuck it, I don't care what people think. He says, as I recall, and I may be wrong on this, I don't think I am, it doesn't matter what is said here in this paper. I just have to sell them. If you want to take it up with the editor. I don't really come into this. I think that's kind of a distinct point from the one that you guys are making.
That sounds like YouTube. Like, we don't care what content you produce, we just hold it.
May I read the appropriate section of text real quick? I've got it pulled up here. The news pony, who had been just looking at Bonbon with amusement through her spiel, just laughed as she reached her conclusion. Hey, look, lady, I'm sorry you feel that way, but my job is just to sell papers. I don't really care what's in them. If you have an issue, take it up with the editor. Accent mine.
Thank God you did a voice. That was beautiful.
Yeah, I appreciate that as
so
well.
much.
But I would say that lends itself to my interpretation still.
I don't know.
The fact that he's saying it with amusement
that's
and kind of smirking, like, I think he knows it's bullshit, and doesn't care, just wants to sell papers.
Yeah,
he knows that he can get these idiots to buy whatever he prints if it'll sort of confirm their pre-existing notions that they already have. So that would, to Mami's point, I think that does kind of point to, or I think it may be a commentary on the on the press and some of the unscrupulous practices there.
Again, I don't disagree with that. I don't think that it represents a grey area, but I'm not going to spend another half hour dying on this hill.
No, I see where you're coming from. You kind of wanted more of a...
That's pretty objective. Sorry, that's objectively evil, yes. I think we're meant to read that he's sort of smirking as he says this. He knows it's bullshit, but he also knows that he can make a profit out of it. That's not so much a gray area. I think that's just evil.
It sounds like you're saying you wish there was more of a blur between the two viewpoints where the person did believe what they were saying versus someone who's like, I don't care. I would say that indifference is its own gray area in that it kind of exists outside the Venn diagram, but I do get what you mean. And I agree. I wish there had been a little bit more exploration of that.
I think I have 2 points. We'll see if I can remember enough to make them. But it's funny, my interpretation of the pony selling the newspapers was a little bit different just because of where I'm at. And granted, he's a bit more blasé about the whole thing than I am. But working in a library, I absolutely have to stock books and occasionally even find and give them to people that I think are absolute garbage. And it's like, I don't have, as a public servant, I don't have control over that. My responsibility is to get you the materials. And if someone has an issue with what materials are there, it is unfortunately not within my power to affect any of that. I can simply direct you to someone who might be able to listen. So I almost kind of sympathized, even if I do care a bit more than the said merchant pony. The other bit was, I think we would have had less of this binary if Bonbon, like I said before, could have shown a bit more of what you can do in these circumstances. As it is, I think it's been said, she is kind of just doing the exact same thing as Lyra. She's saying, I believe this version, and I'm even going to call out this pony peddling the other version, even though I have done no work whatsoever to verify or investigate it on my own. I wish she could have represented a little bit more of what you can learn to do in dealing with these kind of situations, in digging deeper, interviewing, checking, source verification. Hell, even going and seeing the Princess of the Moon and all that sort of thing. I wish she could have represented a bit more of that dedication in what you can do to protect yourself and come to good conclusions in these kind of situations. As it is, I do sympathize with Cygnus in that we do just kind of get two sides of poor and lazy behavior.
I guess you could argue that the dramatic gasp of Midori trying to talk and me cutting in. Sorry, I'll be quick. I do think that you could say that Bon fucking lost my point, god damn it. Jesus. Now I know how NP feels sometimes. What were it? Bon and fucking, I don't know. I lost it. Go ahead, Midori.
Bon and fucking. I don't think that was in this story.
Yeah, that's a whole different kind of thing.
So what
Midori, go on.
So I was going to say, in relation to what Thornquill said, something that I desperately wanted to see addressed was that radio broadcast, like more research to be done into that, because as it stands, the radio broadcast that everybody is remembering incorrectly or whatever here, it almost sounds like War of the Worlds. Maybe it was some sort of show that everybody took way too seriously as real and fact, and they are remembering it as real and fact when it was really just a show meant to draw in listeners and entertain.
But I think that was one of the points that came up right at the end of the section with the father, if I'm remembering this correctly, is that there was no show. There was no hard evidence, no anything that this could be traced back to, just flat paranoia, and while I agree it would have been great if we'd had another 10, 15, 20,000 words dedicated to this, I say this every time, I think podcasts, or I'm sorry, not podcasts, the fics that we review need to be either 90% shorter or 90% longer. I don't think that there was intended to be any resolution to that. I
remembered my point. And I was just going to point out the dichotomy of Bon and Lyra in that I think you could argue Bon isn't supposed to do things the right way, and her ineffectiveness in proving her point is what allows things to spiral out of control. There's almost a bystander effect of her in being so confident that she is immediately right, and her friend telling her, oh yeah, I have to explain bullshit to my family all the time, and they're still so stupid they just don't get it. So, some people are just stupid, so whatever, what can you do? I think in Bon not going the extra mile to say, okay, well, here's how I'm going to look into it, here's how I'm going to get the facts together, I'm going to get the princess herself to arrive and say, no, I am real and alive and I did not die, here's what actually happened, instead of going through what she should have gone through, which was to get unbiased sources to pull together an argument. She's just, oh, that's obviously stupid, and I can't believe that this is happening. And in not making that argument, Lyra going out of her way to look for sources confirming her bias, and in confirming that bias in other people and gathering that crowd, all of that happens because Lyra puts the work in to the wrong side of the argument, because there is a right and wrong in this fic. Princess Luna is alive. She wasn't actually dead years ago, unless you're going with the whole alternate universe theory that Thornquill brought up. So Bon is right, but because she doesn't prove it, everything goes to shit.
I will argue on a different side of that, just because you can do all the work, you can for yourself. And you can do all of this and come to a fairly reasonable confidence that you've arrived at a good conclusion. That is definition of research. And you can do all of that, and there are some people that you are simply not going to be able to persuade. That is a reality. And I think this story could have done that, and it would have made me happier. With what we're left with just kind of this view of, oh, well, like Cygnus said, people are idiots. There's nothing you can do about it. There's, you can't research. You can't get the right answer. I get a very cynical vibe from that. I don't know that that's what the author intended. But given the weight of the material we are discussing, well, it's so ridiculous, so much weighty material in ponyfic, but that's our world. And given how important this issue is, I wish the author had represented that side that you can do for yourself and still acknowledge there are going to be people you can't persuade, and led people to that understanding as opposed to this kind of just throwing up of the hands and, well, it ends with divorce. Have a good day.
Well, and that's kind of what I meant when I said that I wish this had been done more competently, if it was aiming for the "this is everyone is an idiot" ending, because that can be done well, and that is an important message to bear in mind, and I don't disagree with the notion that that is something that needs to be said. But again, with the, as you say, with the focus on the personal drama as opposed to the larger implications, let's say, it really just it didn't work. It just did not work. It came across as even more of a neutral blur, throw your hands up ending than even one that could actually come across as meaning something.
I will argue that the actual ending of Luna showing up and raising the moon in front of everyone could throw that off a little bit, because at the end, Bon turns to Lyra after everyone has just seen Luna raise the moon, and Lyra is so sure that Luna doesn't exist, and this new Luna must really not be the Moon Princess. And Bon, there's this moment where you think, surely Lyra must believe that this is true now, but Bon goes something like, "There's really nothing I can say to make you change your mind." And Lyra, after staring at that, was like, "Nope, I believe what I believe." And you could argue if Bon is how the author is, in that her opinion is, okay, just throw your hands up and be done with it. I would argue that because it ends on a somber note, with Bon and Lyra being, possibly broken up or, being tense, with it having not an optimistic ending, the fact that things went so awfully is evidence that more than one person in the fic did something wrong. I think that does lend to the argument that Bon isn't supposed to be perfectly right. Yes, she's right about the fact that Princess Luna exists. I mean, she's not factually wrong, but the way she conducts herself is wrong. And at the end, it's not that Lyra could never have believed that Bon was right. It was that Bon didn't try. So even when the truth is like literally flying in front of their faces, they have gotten to the point that Lyra couldn't possibly believe it, because there was no intervention along the way. And I think that's kind of a commentary on the path to extremism more than anything.
And again, I won't suggest that anything of what you just said changes my mind about any of this, which might actually be an interesting conversation unto itself, if you take the themes of this story and apply them to the conversation that we're having at the moment.
I think I can...
How dare you disagree with me?
I think I can respect that interpretation, Mami, and I think I agree with you that it does work on a level. I think what rubs me the wrong way so much is that focusing on the characters as kind of stand-in for ourselves as the readers, as our windows into the world, the way it's portrayed is a total abdication of responsibility. For the way for it to sort of be cleared up and for Bon to be vindicated, to have that have to be an external force come in for everyone else, that being Luna coming in and raising the moon, that still abdicates the responsibility of the individual to look into these issues for themselves. Myself, with my worldview, I really want to see a story dealing with these issues advocate more for personal responsibility and going to those extents on the character's behalf, not waiting for the princess to come in and solve everything. I will say there's a bit of dark comedy in that interpretation, in that so often the theme of the show is wait for the princess to come in and solve everything, and here the princess comes in and it does nothing. So that's a little bit funny. But yeah,
it's so meta.
This I think
Deus Ex
This,
failure.
I think, just does not work with me on that level. So I think that's just where we're left on that. That comes in more on the level of personal interpretation and how you see these issues, not necessarily something that is critical to the writing of a story, although with this particular issue, I will say that's kind of important. But I think we've beaten this argument.
I think this may be a part where it suffers for being what seems like largely a joke fic, in that it started as more of a pun than anything, and obviously the comedy aspect was leaned into more than the tragedy. You could say that it wanted to touch on certain ideas, but it didn't want to be a fic that explores them in a fair and unbiased way. It was very much just kind of poking fun at a current phenomenon. Or, an old one, depending on how you look at it.
Okay, then. Does anybody else have anything they particularly want to say? Because
Nope,
I will gladly announce it and leave it open to it to discussion. I feel really superfluous this podcast because I've had nothing to say. Apart from random dick jokes, I serve no purpose.
That's how Gumi felt before he yesterday and even this morning before he started having his issues that he couldn't attend because of he felt like he didn't really get anything out of this. He didn't really have anything to say about it, and I had some things to say about it, but on these
You
points,
had more to say than I have.
but on these points particularly, I don't really have anything to say about point number 9. And as for point number 10, the ending, we kind of transitioned into that when Cygnus was going on a bit of a philosophical rant about this. And I do not think that I could compete with his level of what he has already said about.
Most of us can't compete with
Right?
Cygnus when he really gets on a roll.
Well, I'm terribly sorry.
This is just something we've had to... No, we just have to accept our inferiority, I'm
That is
afraid.
not-
Yes, we
intent.
have to accept our
No, it may
inferiority to Fluffle Cygnus.
It may not be your intent, but it is definitely the effect. It's hurry the shit!
And if you think it's terrifying when Cygnus gets on a roll, imagine what happens when he gets on a croissant.
Oh my god!
This
What?
entire podcast was worth it for that line.
I
Oh my
agree.
god, Thornquill, I love you.
Oh, good. I'm not being asked to leave.
No, you're a member for life for that one.
Oh my god.
Oh my god.
10 out of 10.
So I just want artwork of Cygnus riding a croissant.
I'll make it happen.
You
Oh
had
my
to say
God.
that with the artist in
Please.
here.
Oh, yeah. You fuckers can't joke about anything. I'll get you.
I heard
Oh,
that.
Mami, please, please, please have him riding a croissant, please.
I heard that very differently when you said that. I heard writing a croissant, and I was like, "What is the croissant? The quill or something?"
Oh, Cygnus, I'm so sorry.
Please.
Please
if I-
don't
if-
hate me.
No, you're not.
If I may have one request, do not make it sexual.
Oh god, no.
Oh, this
Are
is Mami
aprons
we're talking
allowed?
about. No.
No. It's gotta be an ooty cutesy croissant.
Okay.
Like bread cat. Nyan cat.
Make Cygnus fluffy.
Yeah.
Rainbows
Croissant
shooting out
farting
behind him.
rainbows. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
there you go.
Cygnus riding a croissant farting rainbows.
Okay, no.
You gotta overlay it with the sound effects from this podcast.
I'm not sure you can hear the face palm.
Yes, that's the one.
Oh my god, you guys! I'm literally crying
What
from
have I
laughter.
done?
Oh, you broke me.
Thornquill, I thought we were friends.
I didn't intend for this. My actions
You just
have
have to
had
get him back.
unforeseen consequences.
I just wanted a salad.
It's true. I just wanted a pun.
Oh god.
I'm done. Stick a fork in me. I'm done.
Well, Scribbler's dead. We should probably wrap this up.
Midori finally got her wish. I'm dying on this podcast.
I knew it. I knew you'd say it.
I mean, okay.
Oh Lord.
As far as the ending of this story, I made it a point because I got to the ending and I scrolled down and I thought, wait, that's it? Because honestly, I'm still having such a hard time winding down from that whole escapade of chaos.
Because you can't stop thinking of Cygnus on a farting rainbow croissant.
I can't stop thinking about him on a croissant. I can stop thinking about the farting version. That's weird. But, okay.
Do you know where you are?
Unfortunately.
That's weird.
Nope.
That's like saying I can
I'm
breathe.
not taking any examples of things that have been weirder. I refuse.
You've acted in things that were weirder.
Let the
I'm
man
still
speak.
refusing for the time being.
Castle porno.
I refuse. The ending. I mean, okay. I just have to say I found this ending very deeply unsatisfying because I felt like it cut off a good scene or two before it resolved anything. Listening to some of the points that Mami has made, it makes a little bit more sense to me, but I still feel like ending a comedy fic with like a threat of divorce is weird. I feel like the ending does not fulfill a definition of tragedy at all, because maybe they do get divorced and that's sad. That would be tragic. As far as I can tell, a character hasn't really failed at anything they're trying here, so it's not a tragedy in that sense. I was just confused by the ending. That's really all I got. It may be a moot point to try to bring discussion back for so short a time on that point. I'll acknowledge that.
I think we can safely characterize this one as a dead horse.
I don't know.
Seems kind of appropriate for ponyfic.
I think everything I've said up to now would make it obvious that I think the ending works. I like that it doesn't go out of its way to tie off a lot of plot threads. I'm personally a fan of open-ended fics, so I kind of like that it didn't, do anything too extreme with the ending.
I guess I didn't even get a really clear sense of where things would go from here. I'm okay with open-end if I have a few roads to follow, but in this case, all I really know is that Lyra is probably insane and is going to continue on being insane. I had no idea whether the crowd would continue to be insane. There was even an odd bit of line, like, I don't even know what that line of every pair of eyes and every not quite pair of eyes. I'm just taking that to assume Derpy was in the crowd. But yeah, like, this is where the fic failed to fulfill a point for me, because if its point was that everyone is an idiot, then the whole mob would have continued being a mob. If it wanted to make another point about evidence of your eyes or whatnot, then Lyra would have been left alone and insane. I needed just a bit more direction.
I agree. I really didn't like that last line of every set of eyes and not quite set of eyes seeing what they wanted to see, because that doesn't tell us what they were seeing. It just leaves it so up to interpretation that I just didn't get any satisfaction out of it.
I would argue that's the point. Well, the point isn't for you to not be satisfied. The point is for maybe is for maybe you to have to think about it a little bit. Like, you could interpret it the obvious way, which is, Lyra believed what she believed, Bon kept believing what she believed in. But you could also interpret it as people may have changed their mind. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can look at that line and at the ending itself, and I think that was intentional.
But unfortunately, they immediately follow it up with Lyra adamantly stating, no, even with this proof right in front of me, I refuse to believe. I will believe what I was believing before. And that causes us to instantly think that a lot of that crowd is probably going to be thinking the same way.
Does it?
Yes.
That could just be your interpretation, and I think that's part of the point.
I think I'm going to... Sorry, go ahead, Scribbler.
I was gonna say that was a good line to end on, but if you want to keep going.
The only thing I think I need to compare it to, just so that I'm not too big of a hypocrite in my own mind, is Body of Work, the story that we reviewed a while back, and that I was the knight dying alone on the hill trying to defend. which also ended on a open note that left everyone deeply unsatisfied. The reason I felt in that story it worked okay for me was that the entire story had been about unanswered questions. So unanswered questions worked okay as an ending for me. Everyone else was deeply unsatisfied. In this story, I don't get that continuity of a theme. It sounds like we have ended with an unwillingness to say whether the crowd would come to one conclusion or another. And I understand, I appreciate it. I likewise appreciate it when a story leaves things open to interpretation, but I also think that something has to feel satisfying by the story's end. With this one, we have no resolution for any character on any front whatsoever. I think in stories where you end open-ended, you at least resolve something. In Body of Work, it was that Twilight finally reached out to touch the object that she had hitherto been avoiding. I should probably not be too spoilery. In this one, we have no resolution. So in Body of Work, that was the resolution of the tension for me. In this one, I don't feel we have any resolution for anything at all. And I think the story had to have resolved something, and I think all stories do have to feel satisfying on some level. We have to be satisfied to be left to answer some questions, not just be left with questions.
I don't know. I think you're conflating resolution with an overcoming of an issue. I would argue that Lyra's arc is perfectly tied up because her initial kickoff, the rising action was her questioning this thing that's happening. And by the end of it, she's certain in her answer.
She has no arc, though. She does the same thing for every stage of the story, and she does the same thing at the end of the story. To quote Applejack, I didn't learn anything.
Hear, hear.
That's all that needs to be said.
If I may. So for my part, I just sort of personally in my own life and discussions I've had with some of my own family, try not to get too very specific, but if you try really hard, you can probably infer who I'm referring to. But there's one particular politician who a whole lot of people just who believe in firmly with all their heart any inference that this person may have been untruthful or not perfect in some way. People just dismiss that as being
a very hypothetical example with some tie out there, but you can't prove what it is.
Exactly. So, but just like I did my best, and eventually I just got tired of it. And I tried to corner this person, my relative, on this one particular point where I said that this politician has lied about something. He says, no, they definitely didn't. I said, hold it right there. Took me a moment or two. I found quotes on YouTube in each specific tab where this one politician said one thing and then said the other. I said, and I turned to my relative and I said, okay. Now what do you think? They said, that's fake news. I said, which one? So anyway, just that part of, okay, no, this is definitely true, and I definitely believe this. And then I've shown you irrefutable proof with your own eyes that what I'm saying is true. And they'll say, no, it's not. Yep. So there's this moment where Lyra and everyone right there in front of everybody, the Moon Princess is right there. You can see her. She's raised the moon, and the mayor and the moon is gone. So this is irrefutable proof that she's just crazy and she's just misremembering stuff, and she says, no, there's nothing you can do to change my mind. And this discussion that I had with my relatives went the same direction. They said, no, there's nothing you can do to change my mind. I said, that's just blind faith, and that's really dumb. So I left at the end of this fic. I personally left feeling really just depressed and sad.
We all know a Lyra.
We all indeed know a Lyra, and that is the one focus this fic had that I don't think anyone can disagree with. I think what we disagree with is just the way they went about talking about the Lyra.
Are they universally called the Lyras now? Like a band
Probably
name?
not, because Lyra deserves so much better. What? I like the character.
What character?
I'm right there with you. Not in this story so much. Background pony.
Oh god, no, we don't talk about background pony. But that is let's just torture Lyra for 200,000 words and then leave her with a bad ending.
Right,
Ugh.
I probably will need to start getting going here. Can we wrap this up, or do we still have things to say?
I
think we're about done.
I think we're about done at 2 hours and 7 minutes, and I have not been able to contribute for quite some time, so I'm quite happy to end.
It's as good a time as any.
It does seem like a pretty good place to end on. Like, it's open to interpretation. We can all respect each other's opinions for that. Et voila. Right then, we have been them's writing words. So, final thoughts and goodbyes. Final thoughts.
Still
Cygnus.
better than bona fide, but still didn't get nearly as much as let me try that again. Much better than bona fide, but not quite as effective as it thought it was going to be.
Narrator?
Mami has made some very good points, and I feel better about this fic coming out of it than I did going in. And in particular, I think, if you believe as I believe, that the author has edited the fic to change the characters from Octoscratch to Lyra, I think that was a genius stroke.
Croissant King.
Oh my god. I think that this story, the one thing it was actually trying to do was ponify the Mandela Effect and make a story out of that. And it tried really, really hard to make a narrative out of a concept. I don't think it came together on a lot of fronts, and I think that's why a lot of people didn't have much to say about it, was just because, as scattered as it is, it's really hard to get any ideas out of it. It just feels unfocused.
Midori?
I went into this story and I came out unsatisfied. The satisfaction that I got was discussing it with you guys, but that's simply because of all the different interpretations and potential things that could have happened after. The fact that I had to get that from talking about it with you guys just goes to show that the story just didn't work, at least on some level, for me and potentially other people by itself. It needed more, and that's just my opinion.
Mami?
I think it's worth the read, if only to find out how you personally feel about it, because obviously it's pretty polarizing and there's a lot of ways to interpret it. There's also little bits that a lot of different people might like. Like, I personally like the little slice of life bits, like the little opening scene in the morning with breakfast between Lyra and Bonbon. So there's a little bit of something for everybody or nobody, depending on how you see it. And I'm very interested to see if the author sees this podcast and what Forths thinks, because Forths does take well to reviews. So it would be interesting to see if there's any commentary on any of the things we said.
I really want to share this with Forths once it comes out.
Oh god. Should we?
Well, my final thoughts are, I got more out of this podcast than I did out of the fic itself. So it seems to be one of those that it seems almost tailor-built for this kind of format, in that just as a fic, I was pretty indifferent to it. As a talking point, it became so much more, which is all we can really ask of it. Well, we have been them's writing words. We're going to say goodbye now. I have been Scribbler. Cygnus?
Cygnus, bye.
Mami? Wait, no, sorry, no. I forgot. Midori, what's our next fic?
Our next fic... Our next fic is one of my personal favorites that, to my knowledge, a lot of you have not actually read. It is called Home is for the Weak. It is by, let me see here. Pickleless.
Okay. Well, next time we're looking at Home is for the Weak by Pickleless. That is a hell of a
so
name.
explicit.
That is
Does.
that is a
for the
terrible
weak.
name to be on this podcast.
Yeah.
His avatar is a pink banana.
So it's by the castrated author. Okay.
Okay.
Can we just have a moment of silence for the fact that Midori picked one of her favorite fics for this podcast? Did you not learn from
I don't
Mona?
know, it didn't work out too poorly for me.
Oh, it's like I said earlier, I picked this fic because I really don't care if you guys don't like it. I just want to see your reactions. And
That's portentous.
And I will say, this story is completed, but you don't have to read everything that is there. You just need to read up to a certain point, which is where the story actually ends. And that is the chapter, let me see here. It may be for the week, but you should really have one. Published on the 31st of October in 2015. That is where the actual story ends. After that, everything is just stories from after the story ended or before the story ended of just random slice of life nonsense in their life.
Okay, I'm looking at this. It's got like 30, 40 chapters, but they're all like less than 1,000 words each.
Oh, that'll be interesting.
So this is not one to save until the morning of the podcast, is what you're saying?
No, it's 22,000 words long, so we can't really do the shitty things we did in this
try
one.
me.
Wait. Like I said, you only have to read it to the chapter. It may be for the week, but you should really have one. That is 12.
12.
Yep. And if you look up to that point, all the chapters are like less than 1,000 words. If even like one of them is 1,000 words, but there's one in there that's even only 83 words long.
Yeah.
So you can probably read this the morning of. I still don't recommend that you do it because you might get addicted to it and want to read more. But I'm just saying, I can't wait to see your guys' reactions to this one.
There is
Okay.
There is a chapter in this called Scrotum Durs Pony.
What?
What?
There is a chapter. Look, I'm looking at it. I put the link in this chat. There is a chapter in this called Scrotum Durs Pony.
Knowing the author's
Midori, what have
icon
you
and
done?
name, I am so scared.
The second chapter of this story is called Beat Children Who Are Smaller Than You. I can't wait for you guys to read.
Jesus.
I think I'm withdrawing from the next podcast in protest.
Fuck.
I'm warning you, Midori. If you've betrayed my trust, there will be words.
But you
Righty
trust how?
dice.
By deliberately giving me a crack fic.
One of the chapters is 2 words long.
One of
Yeah,
the
it
chapters.
is.
One of the
Twilight
chapters.
tries to trick No Pony into dating her. No Pony X Twilight chapter. 2 words long.
Read it right now. That's a great.
I mean,
chapter.
Faulkner did that.
Spoilers.
Reading it now.
She failed.
Oh my god, I've just read the chapter.
I mean, Faulkner did that. He has an entire chapter that says nothing except my mother is a fish.
This one just says she failed.
Oh my god.
See, Cygnus, you judged it before you knew it.
I don't really think I did.
Well, this is going to be an
Cygnus is
interesting
the
one.
Lyra.
Cygnus,
next
I'll read
time.
it and let you know. You can trust me.
Croissant boy.
That's Croissant King! Thank you very much.
Yes! Yes, 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 yes!
Please let that be my ringtone.
Croissant King.
Goodbye, everyone.
Every time
See
you
you
get
next
text
time.
message.
Goodbye,
Cygnus
everybody.
out.
We
Later.
love you.
Bye, everyone.
Oh my god, the Croissant King!
Yes,
we're
we're done. We are fucking done.
That ending couldn't have been better. I'd completely forgotten about that till Cygnus.
The way he said it, too. Croissant boy.
The utter betrayal.
You can trust me, Croissant Boy.
Okay, so yeah, good podcast, everybody, and it's